Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. Now there was a certain man of Rephaim, Zophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Eliu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So here as we begin this book of 1 Samuel, which, as most of us know, that the book of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel was originally one book. Like 1st and 2nd Kings was originally just Kings. 1st and 2nd Chronicles was just Chronicles. But on top of that, the book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings were actually the first four books of the kingdoms. The book 1 Samuel is talking about mostly the reign of King Saul. Then you have the reign of King David rising to power, his ups and downs, Solomon, then the dissolution of the one country into two, and the fall of the kings and everything that falls out from there after the death of Solomon. But here is 1 Samuel's beginning. We see another example, and we'll see another example, of a polygamist marriage. You have this place where people like to point out that polygamy is not directly spoken against in the Old Testament. God doesn't just say, do not have more than one wife. He does tell kings not to multiply wives, but he doesn't say it to just normal people. But we come time and time again, and 1 Samuel, the beginning of it here, is yet another example of this, where we are shown an example of why God's creation of one man and one woman in the sanctity of marriage, becoming one flesh as Adam and Eve were, is what God intended. And that this cultural idea of having more than one wives and having concubines is exactly that, a description of culture and man's fallen nature, and not a prescription of God. Because as we see, Hannah has no children. Peninnah has children. And in the ancient culture, if a woman had no children, she was considered to basically have been accursed of God. She clearly was doing something wrong. The man couldn't be the blame because his other wife had children. And more than likely, Elkanah had Hannah as a wife first and only took Peninnah as a wife because Hannah could not have children. Because of man's impatience for something to happen. Just as we saw with Abraham taking a concubine, taking his wife's maidservant, and having another son. Before God came through and bore out his promise to have Isaac. In Sarah and Abraham's impatience, they bore a son they should not have had, because that was not the son God meant to use to bring forth redemption for all mankind. That would be Isaac. But we do see Elkanah is a man of worship. He, coming out of this time of Judges, is a man who keeps to the proper worship and sacrifice to the Lord. He has not begun to go off the rails and do things in his own eyes. He has two wives because that's what the culture had begun to allow. Just as the Pharisees would ask Jesus why Moses gave them divorce if God never intended it. And he would tell them it was because the wickedness of your own hearts that God allowed Moses to give you this. In the same way, it's because of the hard-heartedness and stiff-neckedness of the Israelites that God allows them to have more than one wife. Not because he endorses it, but because this is the wickedness of their own hearts, and he is trying to keep his children as close to him as possible. And he corrects them as necessary. As a parent, I see the same thing. Sometimes you let children do things they shouldn't while you try to hold on to them as best you can. When a parent has a child who is an addict, they will oftentimes continue to enable that child, trying to keep them close and keep them cared for. The child's still living in an unrepentant sin. They are still living in a way that they shouldn't, in the depravity and a fallen state that they should not be in. And their parent, in a way, is enabling that by giving them money when they need to pay rent, by giving them a ride when they need a ride, instead of cutting them off fully. They're not affirming the addiction. They're not rooting it on, but they're trying not to fully give up their children into the sinfulness of the world. They're trying to hold on to some measure of lifeline for their kid. And that's what the Lord does time and time again by allowing little things until they step too far, and then he brings forth a judgment upon them, eventually ending up in the judgment of being exiled completely out of the land. But we'll see this Elkanah is a man who still, even in this time of Judges, coming out of that time, is a man who worships and sacrifices the way that the Israelites were always meant to. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion. So you have Hophni and Phinehas, the two priests under the high priest Eli. They would be the ones overseeing the tabernacle in Shiloh. And when they would give up these offerings, they would get to keep some of it for themselves to eat. And he would give Peninnah and her sons and daughters portions. But because of his love for Hannah, he would give her a double portion. He loved her so much. He would give her a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. Even though other people saw her as accursed, the Lord had not seen fit to give her a child because he had closed up her womb and made her infertile. Still he gave her a double portion. Such was his love for his wife. Not out of pity, but out of love for her. He gave her a double portion. And her rival, Peninnah, also provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. And now we see once again the bitter fruit of having more than one wife. If he had just Hannah, he wouldn't have had children, but he had a wife he loved, and a wife that would have been happy in that marriage and not as distressed as she ended up being. Sure, she'd have been sad that she didn't have a child. But now she has this other woman who he has sons and daughters through, who provokes her, who teases her, who ridicules her severely, who makes her life miserable because the Lord hasn't seen fit to allow her to have a child. So it was year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. So year after year, Peninnah, going to worship the Lord, is provoking this woman before the Lord, at the house of the Lord. Probably saying things along the lines of, look how I've been blessed, but you've been cursed. This is why he needed to bring me as a wife. This is why he needed me and he just keeps you around as a pet. We don't know what she said, but if you're being provoked severely to the point where you are weeping and you are distressed and you are not partaking of these offerings, you have to be downcast. It had to be harsh. And that's the kind of vileness that comes through, the sinfulness that comes through when you're living in a sinful environment. The very nature of their marriages were sinful because it was not what was meant to be. Elkanah was not meant to have more than one wife. And because he did, the two wives butted heads. Because one saw themselves as being more blessed than the other. As we would see with the parable of the sinner and the tax collector and the Pharisee. That the Pharisee, in all his abundant blessings, the Lord would come forth and say, God, thank you for not making me like these lowly people. Because in his blessings, he brought forth pride instead of humility. Not settling for the truth that even in his blessings, he needs to be humble because his blessings didn't come from himself. Peninnah's blessings of children didn't come from anything she did. She is blessed of the Lord. And she's using that blessing to be a burden to others instead of someone bringing relief to others. And you had the tax collector. Lord, forgive me because I am so lowly. Forgive me because I am so wretched. I'm not like this Pharisee learned and keeping your law like I should. Forgive me because I am a wretched, vile person. He understood the truth of his own nature, that he had no righteousness outside of God. That's where Hannah is. She is humbled before the Lord. Peninnah, in her blessings, has become puffed up and proud, as if she had something to do with the blessings the Lord had poured forth. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? And this is not a jealous statement. This is him trying to help his wife who's grieving in a way. Grieving the life she hasn't had and wishes she had. It's a state we get in sometimes where we go, if only I had studied harder, if only I had done better, if only I had not been this way as my kids were growing up, if only I'd made this choice. We grieve the life we think we could have had. We grieve what our expectations were for our life at one time. The potential of the life we could have grown into, instead of focusing on the blessings of the life we do currently have and have realized. And Elkanah's just being a loving husband. Why are you crying? I've given you a double portion. Eat your food. Why are you so grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Is our life together not blessed enough? Do we not have a good life? Why do you grieve for what you don't have instead of appreciating what you do? And there's not exactly a sin to wish you had done something or had something you didn't have. That's not coveting what someone else has. That's just grieving for the potential you had but never realized. He's trying to be a loving husband. I've heard some people try to be like, he's just not getting what is bothering her. In a way, he's not. But in another way, he's just trying to do what he can. He can't give her a son. They've tried. He knows that is the Lord's domain. Life and death is the domain of the Lord. He knows that. So he's trying to get her to understand, to look at the blessings the Lord had provided them, instead of focusing on the things he's withheld. Because not every gift is meant for every person. There are many women who wish they had children and they never do. And that's not, they can grieve that missing part of themselves. But so often they do end up taking that energy and those blessings they do have and pouring them out on others in different ways. We are blessed in so many ways, different than other people are blessed. Covetousness ends up being when we want the blessing someone else has. And in a way, Hannah does want the blessing Peninnah has. But she doesn't want her kids. She wants a child of her own. She wants to know that she wasn't abandoned by the Lord. So Elkanah's not in the wrong, but neither's Hannah. They're just at a different state of this process of not having children together. She is aggrieved of the mistreatment she's had, grieved that the Lord has not provided her with a child yet. Elkanah has already moved on to accepting that they don't have one and living his life blessed and joyful in the blessings he has. So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. So she goes to the tabernacle. Eli the high priest is there, sitting by the doorpost of the tabernacle. And she is bitterness of soul, not bitterness of the Lord. She's not bitter at God. She's just bitter. Same as we read in Ruth, that Naomi, call me Mara, call me bitterness. She never lost sight of the Lord, but she had felt that the Lord lost sight of her and felt a bitterness in her soul. And in a lot of the same ways, Hannah is feeling the same thing, where Naomi lost her family and could see no way forward because she was too old to have another one. Hannah here is looking at it and seeing a family she has not had, the Lord has not blessed her with. And she's bitter in her soul with the way that her life has not become what she wished it had been. And prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. She brings her troubles to the Lord, weeping in anguish, bringing everything to him, going to the very door of where he was housed in those days. The Lord is everywhere. He's not in the tabernacle. He's not in the Ark of the Covenant. But that's where they took things. Weeping in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. So where Samson's parents were told that he would be a Nazirite from birth, Hannah is making this vow for her child. If you give me this child, I will give him over to you. For his entire life, I will make this child be your servant. He will be yours forever. Just give me this blessing. Remember me. Act in my favor. And it happened as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli watched her mouth. She's not speaking in out loud. She's not making this oath aloud to everyone. Eli's just watching her mumble, watching her mouth move, watching her distraught and broken. Now Hannah spoke in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you." He can't see the truth of the moment. He just sees the debauchery of the time of the judges around him. He doesn't see the true worship coming before him, the true brokenness coming before him, before God, because he only sees it through the lens of the brokenness around him, of the degeneracy around him. He can't see what is happening before him. You go to church long enough, you will see people come into the sanctuary, broken, crying, mumbling, pouring their hearts out before God. And in some cases, they can look out of it. They can look deranged because you don't know what's in their heart. You don't know what they're saying. But if you look with the discerning nature that the Spirit has given you, you can see them pouring it out to God. An unbeliever can look at them and see them, and they look like they are deranged and insane. A believer using discernment sees them and sees the wonder and awesomeness of the Lord working through them. Eli had become very much like the world around him, high priest or not. And he's only seeing the degeneracy and fallenness of the people around him, and not the true pouring out of the heart of a believer. He can see people going through the religious notions of their faith, the sacrifices, the motions of the faith, the sacraments of the faith. He can see that happening, and he understands that. But when he sees a woman truly broken, truly pouring her all out before the Lord, he can't discern it. He can't see it. He can't understand it. Because religion for these people, their relationship with the Lord had fallen so hard into people doing what was right in their own eyes, all they could see is the motions of their religion, not the relationship with their Father. They can hear the song. They can see the sacrifice. But they weren't able to truly understand and discern the relationship with a loving Father, pouring your heart out to him, pouring your life out for him, giving everything you have to him, broken in every possible way. They weren't able to discern that, because that's something that only comes from the Spirit. It's not waving a censer. It's not lighting a candle. It's not going through a religious motion. It's something that is broken deep down inside you that makes you know that you have to cry out to the feet of your loving Father, who is there to listen whenever you do it. But Hannah answered and said, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrow for spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now." "No, Lord. No, Adonai. No, Eli, I am not drunk. I am broken before the Lord. I'm not falling apart. I'm pouring out my soul to God." On Pentecost, the disciples would come out, the apostles would come out, Holy Spirit abounding, and they were accused by the religious people of being drunk. Peter said, "We're not drunk yet. It's too early to be drunk. The wine's not even fermented. It's basically grape juice at this point. We're not drunk." But those people couldn't recognize an act of the Spirit. It's not out of control, but it's an outpouring of passion for a relationship with God, a relationship with a Father who loves you. People take these way too far in Pentecostal circles and really do act ridiculous because it becomes a performance for them. But when you see somebody true and coming out before the Lord and pouring themselves out before Him, understand what they're doing. Because it's a beautiful moment that you are now getting the witness. A beautiful moment of love between a father and a child. That they have brought everything to them. In that moment, Hannah here is like the prodigal son. She never left as the prodigal son did, but as the prodigal son threw himself on the mercy of his father, or was about to. That is what Hannah is doing. "Lord, I don't know what I have done wrong, but please forgive whatever it is. This is my trouble. This is what I need to bring to you." And He is gracious and loyal and merciful to listen. Take it to your Father who loves you, because no one can possibly love like He loves, because only He is capable of that perfect love. Then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked Him." She didn't confess it to Eli. She didn't tell him what she prayed. But recognizing that she has prayed in earnest, He says, "Let the God of Israel grant your petition." Shalom. Let the God of Israel grant your petition which you've asked of Him. If you have come to Him this broken, if it's in His will, let Him grant it. Let Him grant it. Something so heartfelt and beautiful. And she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. She went and talked to her father, and felt something that she had not felt before. Bitterness in her soul is now gone, because she laid it at the feet of her God. We're told to lay our worries at the feet of Christ, to lay our yoke at His feet and take up His. But so often we drop at His feet, lay our yoke at His feet, and then pick it back up when we leave and take it with us anyway. We want him to take it, but we also want to hold on to it because it's become a part of our identity. This way in which we're broken and struggling becomes a part of our identity. You sit on social media enough, you will see so many broken young people who their brokenness has become their identity. Their sinfulness has become their identity. Their mental illnesses become their identity so that they can't combat them because they don't want to, because it is how they identify themselves. If they lose that, they don't know what they are anymore. But we need to be like Hannah, taking our everything to him, laying it at his feet, but then leaving it there so we can go our way, no longer saddened, no longer broken in that way. Leave in a way that shows that we trust him with the burden we came to him with. Then they rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked for him from the Lord. So they worshipped the Lord, they returned home, and in time it came to pass that he opened her womb. She conceived a son. She called him Samuel, because that was the child she asked of the Lord. And he granted that request, that petition, that blessing onto her. Now the man Elkanah in his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice in his vow. He went up year after year without missing any of the festivals that he was to go to, any of these yearly trips and feasts that he was supposed to go to, because he was a faithful man to the Lord. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him, only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. So she stayed home. She did not want to go back to the tabernacle because the child hadn't been weaned yet. And she said that she was going to give this child over to the Lord when the time was right. And she intends to keep that promise, but it's still too early to give the child over. He still needs to be weaned. He needs to grow to a certain extent where he could be fed solid foods. He's still a newborn. He's still too young to do all that. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord granted me my petition as I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worship the Lord there. She has dedicated him with the Nazirite vow. She has made that vow to the Lord. Now she comes up to dedicate this child that he is weaned. She is now giving him over to the Eli. Now some people have pointed out, it says they're Ephraimites. Elkanah's an Ephraimite. How could he even go to work at the tabernacle and be left there? He's not a Levite. But we are told later in Scripture that he is indeed a Levite. Because remember, the Levites were spread all through the tribes. So yes, there were Levites in Ephraim. There were Levites in Judah. We even read through Judges about the Levite who took on his own priesthood and priestly line in the tribe of Dan. Elkanah was of the Levites. He was of that descendants, was Samuel. And now he's being sent over to take care in the tabernacle, to worship before the Lord, to be of service to the Lord for the entirety of his life. Something that will happen. But she comes before Eli with these offerings and says, as your soul lives, I am the woman who stood here praying. I'm the woman you thought was drunk. You told me that the Lord be with me and to grant my petition. Here is my answered prayer. Here it is. I have said to the Lord, I will give him over and lend him out to the Lord for the entirety of his life. Here is this child. Prayer and the mercies and the blessings and the miracles of the Lord are true. Here is an example. This child, my Samuel. I've always heard it said to make a prayer journal. And when the prayers come true, record that as well. And nearly a year ago at this point, must have been 9 months ago, whatever, we had been praying for years, my children, my wife, myself, that my mother would begin to come to church with us. A woman who believes in God in her own way, doesn't go to church, to come to church, listen to the gospel, listen to sound teaching, to worship before the Lord. And suddenly, we witnessed that prayer answered. And then it went further. It was, okay, well, she'll come out. We'll go to this church when she comes out. But then she came out every week. When we're on vacation, when she has something to do early, she still goes out. Not even just to be with us. There are weeks she's gone to church to an earlier service. We don't even get to see her in passing. But she's gone to church. She's gone to worship before the Lord and learn more about him and his love for her. That is answered prayer. People always want to see some drastic miracle. And in looking for these drastic prophecy-bending miracles, they miss the everyday ones in their lives. And here she's bringing Samuel saying, look at the miracle God has wrought in my life. I am that woman who was so broken and distraught you thought she was out of her mind and drunk. And I'm here to tell you I wasn't. And this is what I was praying for. This is a realized miracle and blessing the Lord has given me. And I'm here to honor the vow I made to him. Here's this child, this young boy, to be in service to God. The plan for Hannah's life wasn't what she thought, just as we talked about with Naomi and Joseph and Moses and all of these people. But the plan is perfect. The plan is joyful when we walk in it and enjoy the blessings along the way. not focus on the hardships, but enjoy the blessings along the way and see the everyday miracles for what they are, because they are there and they are amazing. But that's where we shall end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.